The real enemy of the Chinese Communist Party, not the USA. If you lived in China, and for some unknown reason you read the local Chinese news, you'd think that the USA was the embodiment of Satan, that any day now it's ready to tear the rest of the world, and Beijing especially, into tiny little pieces. Newspapers and websites in Beijing can never seem to shut up about how everyone in China needs to focus on the giant boogeyman that's just waiting on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. Whether it's cyber threats, trade wars, or straight-up military invasion, there's always something that Washington supposedly has up its sleeve that's going to destroy China any day now. But why have these terrible American actions never happened? It's almost like there's actually a big incentive for the Chinese government to constantly have their citizens always look at what's going on overseas instead of what's happening within their borders. Because whilst America sits there continuing to basically do nothing to hurt the Chinese people, Beijing continues to steamroll along on a path of censorship, surveillance, and Orwellian internal security that is quickly making China one of the most oppressive countries in the world. See, whilst the Communist Party of China likes to show off their flashy new military investments to the population so that everyone keeps their eyes on the supposed threat overseas, they rarely talk about the huge amounts being spent on internal security. You see, if they cared so much about the American threat, surely that would be the number one thing that they'd be spending all of their budget on. But no, China's public safety spending, which is used to maintain public order and control speech at home, reached $210 billion in 2020. The amount more than doubled in 10 years, and as you can see from the chart, they are spending more money on internal security threats than protecting their national foreign threats. Clearly, the Chinese government has a primary target that it wants to defend itself against, and their number one enemy is not the USA, but in fact, it's their own people. Especially since 2016, the Chinese government's focus on what it sees as problems within its own borders has intensified year after year. They don't put in their state-run newspapers or websites, but it's clear that the Communist Party thinks it needs to defend itself more than anything from the Chinese people it is supposed to be leading and governing. That budget for internal security is now ready to exceed the $200 billion mark, which blows most other countries out of the water. Every year it becomes a bigger portion of total government spending, and it wouldn't be a huge surprise if at some point in the next few years it even hits 10% of the government's total budget. There have been large amounts, especially invested in Tibet and Xinjiang, which are two areas where there is an especially large prevalence of minorities. But the Chinese government would never like to share this fact in the face. Instead, if they see an opportunity to criticize the U.S. government for internal security decisions in minority-heavy areas, they'll jump on the bandwagon and write piece after piece about it. But supposedly, that concern ends when it comes to decisions about people living in China. There's absolute silence from the Chinese media about the wild amounts of government money going into monitoring, surveilling, and sometimes even incarcerating the very people that the Communist Party of China is meant to be representing. Yearly increases in domestic security seem to be accelerating too. Bumps started at around 10%, but a few years later, the budget increase was over 15%. And it seems like this speeding up of securitization is going to continue for a while. A lot of this spending is going to much more sophisticated areas than just police boots on the ground. There are billions of dollars being poured into the development and research of cutting-edge technology designed to track people more closely than ever without Chinese citizens ever knowing. Much of it goes towards improving China's well-known web surveillance. This can then be used to funnel public discourse in the direction that the government wants and to silence voices that are critical or might prove challenging. As this technology improves, the work it does becomes even harder to notice. Rather than just being a blunt hammer that tells any account that misbehaves they're in trouble, it aims to subtly push people towards certain news sources and ideas that make people believe whatever it is the Chinese government wants them to believe. The government in China knows that the sooner it perfects this technology, the quicker it can defend itself from its citizens ever turning against them. Controlling the public narrative is a crucial tool for any government that wants to be able to get away with whatever it wants without its citizens pushing back. And those citizens in China almost definitely would push back if they knew the full extent of the surveillance being pushed on them. The high-definition cameras that are starting to fill out China's most important cities mean that Beijing has video access to some of the most highly monitored places in the world. These aren't just average CCTV cameras either, but pieces of equipment decked out with the newest software to match the hardware. The high resolution of these thousands of cameras allows the government to keep a close eye on their citizens with facial scanning technology that supposedly helps fight crime, but can also be used to keep a close eye on anyone the government worries may push against them. There's also the issue of smartphones and apps, where it's not yet known exactly how far the CCP have dug in their claws, but we do know they're doing all they can to make sure they have control again. And all this focus on cybersecurity hasn't meant that there's been a let-up in classic policing, with thousands of paranoid police roaming Chinese cities to deter any potential anti-government agents if the digital repression can't do its job. Whatever technology they're investing in, it's clear that there's nothing more scary to the CCP than its own people, and it's not threats from the West or the outside, but it's all internal and within.